In my previous video, I gave a brief overview of my quest to make Manzanita cider. Today, I'm going to outline the method that I've found that works best for extracting Manzanita juice to make a co-fermentation. The first question you might ask is, when should I harvest the berries? I noticed in 2019 that the hooded orioles began eating the berries from my Lewis Edmonds Manzanita on July 5th, and thus I decided they must be ripe. The berries shown in the picture on the left were picked on July 15th, and you can see they're mostly greenish, but there are a few red or orange berries mixed in. I tasted both a green and an orange berry, and to me they both taste like sawdust, but I would say that the red or orange berries taste like a little bit more flavorful sawdust. So based on my experience so far, I think the red or orange berries yield a fuller bodied cider, and I would recommend waiting until they're orange or red to harvest, which is generally late July or early August here in Sonoma County. Just like apples, you'll know that they're fully ripe when they start falling to the ground. The first thing I do after picking is clean them to remove all the leaves. Although the leaves have traditionally been used for medicinal purposes, you really need to know what you're doing. This is not something you should try at home. Get rid of the leaves. I decided to segregate the mostly green from the orange or red berries so that I could co-ferment them separately and compare the flavor of the resulting cider. That year I ground them in a blender, as suggested by Alicia Funk at the Living Wild Project. The pictures on the right show them after I soaked the Manzanita grounds in hot water. Last year, my Pajaro Manzanita fruited for the first time, whereas Lewis Edmonds, which had fruited heavily the year before, produced not a single berry. The pictures shown here show them after I picked them, cleaned them, and then rinsed them. And my total yield, which was everything I could harvest from my one Paradise Manzanita, was about a half a cup of berries, aka Manzanita drupes. So if you were thinking about trying to make Manzanita cider on a commercial scale, you might want to think again. Through later experimentation, I decided it didn't seem to matter much whether you ground them first or mashed them later after soaking in hot water. So if you're not feeling like bothering with the grinding, just skip that part and proceed to boiling a cup of water per cup of berries, just enough to cover them. Let the water cool slightly before you pour it over the fruit, and then leave them to soak for 30 minutes. Last year, I didn't grind the berries first. Here you can see them after I added hot water on the left, and then they soaked for 30 minutes on the right, and finally at the bottom after I tried to mash the fruit with a back of a spoon. During the 30-minute soak in hot water, you can watch them sink a few at a time. As a potential antidote to anxiety induced by a global pandemic, I highly recommend it. It's kind of like a lava lamp, only more natural. If you didn't grind them before the soak, try to mash or break up the berries, which will help to release the sweet powder, and then leave them to steep overnight at room temperature. The next day, I strain out all the seeds and pulp. This excerpt from Anderson's book, Tending the Wild, attests to the popularity of Manzanita cider among Native American tribes. According to her, they would grind the fruit in mortars before pouring water over them to create the juice. Although she refers to it as cider, I don't believe they were fermenting it. In any case, whatever the tribes called it in their own languages, I'm sure they didn't call it cider. After the overnight soak, I repeatedly pour the juice over the mashed fruit, trying to mimic the process used by the native tribes. My hope is to extract as much of the sugar and flavor as I can from the fruit before I discard the pulp and all the seeds. I ended up with 450 milliliters, or about a cup and a half, of Manzanita juice from my half a cup of berries, to which I added 2 cups of water. The SG was 1.02, but it likely would have been higher if I'd not used so much water. Then I put it in the freezer. In the fall, I co-fermented this small amount of Manzanita juice with a much larger amount of apple juice, so that I ended up with a resulting must that was about 13% Manzanita and 87% apple juice. How do I decide the ratio of Manzanita to apple juice? Well, for me, that's typically dictated by availability. I use as much Manzanita as I can get because I can always blend it down later. And I want to have enough to be able to detect an effect. But if the juice only has an SG around 1.02, then I can't add too much or it will not have a high enough ABV to preserve the cider. Here you see my 2019 batches made with green versus red or orange manzanita berries, along with a control batch that was made simultaneously with the same juice. In my next video, I will tell you more about the results after we blind tasted the experimental batches. In the meantime, good luck with your own experiments. Let me know how they work out.